Snow smothered the wreckage of war like a gravecloth. Shattered drop pods lay half buried under frozen drifts, their alien alloys slowly groaning as they cooled in the Arctic wind. Human corpses, armor half melted from plasma strikes, poked from the frost like forgotten statues. The tundra moon, nameless and uncharted, held no warmth, only the silence of defeat. Somewhere beneath its silence, Corporal Elias Vex breathed shallowly, buried within a narrow crevice carved by ancient glacial flow. He was little more than a shadow wrapped in shredded commo and frostbitten flesh. His fingers, stiff and blackened at the tips, held tightly to a long, rust-flecked object wrapped in cloth, and desperation a bolt-action sniper rifle, centuries obsolete. A museum piece. A joke. They had laughed when he carried it aboard the troop ship. Even the captain smirked. Planning to reenact Earth's first-century wars, Vex? He just shrugged, cradling it like a lifeline. It fires when it's cold, he'd said. Nothing digital does. Now far above the ridge. Line shimmering with artificial gravity fields and elegant propulsion rings, the vessels of the galactic elite descended. Not in force. Not with urgency. Their war was won. This was theater. A ritual. The skiffs fanned out like vultures in a ballet, hovering low to the icy plain. From their polished hulls, drones emerged spherical, gliding, casting soft blue light. Across the snow, they streamed footage to 1 million subscribers across 50 systems, broadcasting the final extinguishment of Earth resistance, Frostfront sector. A tall elite stepped forward. 10 feet high, encased and transparent, flexing synth bone. His form was more sculpture than flesh. Holograms buzzed beside him, narrating his every step in 11 dialects. With a theatrical flourish, he gestured to the snowy carnage and addressed his audience. "Let us see," he said, his voice amplified and saturated with smugness. "If the snowman still breathes." Laughter, artificial and real, echoed from the skiffs. The drones scattered across the ice, their sensors scanning for heat, movement, signals. They would find nothing. The last human was presumed dead hours ago, but down in the crevice beneath a thin veil of frost, Elias' eyes opened. His breath was barely visible. He'd exhaled through a tube to avoid vapor detection. His heartbeat slowed by practice. Hunger gnawed at him, and pain lived behind his ribs like a parasite. But his hand still held the rifle. The scope was cracked. The bolt rough. The wood chipped from a plasma blast. But it still functioned. He remembered his commanding officer shaking his head. "You know we have railguns now, right? Smart scopes? AI-linked triggers?" Elias had just patted the rifle. "Not everything old is useless." The wind howled above like a voice mourning the dead. He waited. Let the aliens mock. Let them get closer. The crevice was shallow, but the angle gave him one clear view, straight to the high ridge where their leader stood, waving at the cameras. Elias didn't smile. He only whispered to himself, breath nearly silent. "You're not ready for how this ends." The cold was a living thing now. It crept into Elias' bones like it had rights, gnawing at nerves, deadening skin. He'd long lost feeling in his fingers, but they still moved with instinct, muscle memory honed through years of training. He adjusted the ancient scope, no digital assist, no auto-stabilizer, just a chipped lens he'd cleared with a drop of melted snow and the hem of his sleeve. Above, the stars glimmered behind the thick polar haze, but he knew their placement by heart. He'd trained under skies clearer than this, in ranges where they taught the old way, charting drift by Polaris, calculating spread by the way snowflakes fell in windless air. He twisted a length of cloth torn from his thermal underlayer, packed it with snow and ice, then tied it tight over the barrel. Crude, barely effective, but a suppressor wasn't meant to hide the shot, just mute the sound enough to confuse the origin. One shot, he muttered, a broken whisper in the wind. One kill, he remembered the voice from sniper school. Chief Warrant Officer Dorn, a man so lean, he looked like the rifle he carried. His words came back with the clarity of fire across a night field. The rifle never misses. Only you do. Blame the wind, blame the cold, blame God if you want. But the bullet goes where you send it. Elias exhaled through his nose, slow and even above the ridge. The aliens were growing bored. Their leader preened in front of the floating camera orb, adjusting the gold bands that looped around his exoskull. With an exaggerated flick, he deployed a swarm of bioluminescent drones, floating balls of light, programmed to sniff out thermal variances and heartbeat rhythms. Elias didn't panic. He moved with purpose, sliding a half-dozen dog tags across the snow on a thin cord, fanning them in a jagged arc toward a broken comms antenna. The tags would pulse faintly, enough to fool low-grade scans. The drones pivoted. Sensors hummed. The elite laughed, their tones sharp and elegant. The ape were trinkets, one of them said, watching the drones swarm the decoy. Even in death, they cling to ceremony. Elias let them talk. He adjusted again. The wind shifted. He noted the way the ice crystals swirled past the edge of the ridge. From this angle, he could see 3 targets clearly. The leader 2 sentries, and the drone operator perched high in a floating skiff. He had time for maybe 1 shot before they realized what was happening. He flattened himself against the snow. His breath slowed. Every beat of his heart was a drum against the cold. He'd survived by becoming nothing, no heat, no sound, no movement. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a weapon buried in frost. He sighted the leader again. Watched how. The alien raised his hand in pomp, turning slowly to each camera. The way a monarch might address a conquered world, Elias didn't blink. He waited and waited. Timing was everything. The reticle hovered steady over the alien noble's throat crest. His skull plate shimmered with iridescent plating, ceremonial, fragile, all show. Not armor. He didn't expect to be in danger. None of them did. This was a parade, not a battlefield. He stood in full regalia, radiant and smug, speaking in 5 languages at once through embedded translator nodes. His voice buzzed across 1 billion feeds, across systems that had never even seen Earth. He raised both arms like some messiah, his words soaring, and so, the last flicker of primitive flame extinguishes beneath the ice of civilization. Elias waited for him to turn 3 degrees. Not just for the angle, though, that mattered, but because it would make the exit one visible to the drone camera floating just behind him. The entire galaxy would see it happen. They needed to. He could hear his own breath now, barely a ghost. His frostbitten finger found the trigger. He didn't feel it. The pain had gone hours ago. But his body remembered what to do. His mind blanked. There was no cold, no hunger, no audience. Only gravity, wind, steel, and the narrowing of a heartbeat. Exhale, fire. The report of the rifle was smothered by snow and cloth, a dull crack. That barely echoed across the ice. It might have been a tree snapping or a stress fracture in the glacier. But the result was immediate. The noble's skull exploded. A web of fractal silicon and golden blood erupted backward into the camera drone, splattering the lens. The image blurred, stuttered, then cut to static. Silence followed, then chaos. Aliens screamed not out of fear for their own lives, but in disbelief. Their feed had gone dark. The show had ended. Without warning. The feed controller turned, looked down, and saw the noble's body slumped forward in the snow, missing half its head. N01 had heard the shot. N01 knew where it came from. An attack? An attack? One of the sentries shrieked. Elias worked the bolt slowly. Smooth. Methodical. 1 round out. 1 in, he found another target. The drone technician scrambled for cover, clutching a device that pulsed with alien glyphs. The other soldiers were shouting at their HUDs, tapping their temples, trying to get thermal visuals back online. Their systems didn't work. The extreme cold had crystallized their optical membranes. Their suits designed for temperate engagements fogged from the inside. Their targeting systems were digital, reliant on orbital satellites that had been destroyed during the first phase of the failed human resistance. None of them had scopes. None of them knew how to shoot without software. Elias took his time. Second. Shot. Straight through the throat of the technician. The alien crumpled in a heap, glowing ichor pulsing through torn silicate veins. The panic set in. Some fired blindly into the snow. Bright bolts of plasma carved steaming furrows into the ice. But Elias was already moving, already shifting 10 feet left, disappearing beneath the powder crust. He'd dug escape trenches earlier that morning, just in case. Rabbit holes, and firing loops, old guerrilla tricks they dismissed as prehistoric warfare. A third shot rang out. This one clipped the elite commander's second in line through the hip joint. He collapsed, shrieking, suit leaking coolant and blood. No. One knew what was happening. The feed had been broadcasting to trillions. From the opulent palace hives of Varnic to the pleasure rings of the Shinthari Nebula, beings of all species had tuned in expecting the humiliation of a dying race. Their chats had been flooded with memes, their comments dripping with superiority. Now, the feed was gone. In its place, static, confusion, and suddenly whispers. Did The human just. Elias reloaded again, slower this time. His hands were numb, but precise. He watched the remaining squad fall back in disarray, trying to regroup behind their skiff. One tried to lift off, but the engines had begun to freeze unshielded against a world this harsh. He could end them all, but he didn't need to. He just needed them afraid. He whispered, barely audible, "Did you forget? We invented war." Another flashback came unbidden. Not a voice this time, but an old training reel, grainy black and white footage of trench fighters in the Second World War. Bolt actions. Shovels. Blood in the mud. 100 nations clawing each other apart with hands and grit. Not satellites and AI. The aliens thought war was elegance. Humans knew better. War was cold. War was blood in your boots and iron in your teeth. War was holding a rusted rifle in a frozen world long after everyone else had left. He spotted one of the aliens scrambling toward the noble's body, trying to recover the cerebral node from the shattered skull. Maybe to salvage footage. Maybe to prove this hadn't happened. He didn't make it halfway before Elias' fourth shot took out his knee. They screamed now panic, not rage. Elias could barely hear them over the wind. He didn't smile. There was no joy here, just survival, just message. He loaded a fifth round, then paused. The skiff's engines whined, beginning to lift again. Someone inside must have bypassed the freeze lock. He let it go. Let them escape. Let them carry the story with them. A lone man in a storm. A rusted rifle. 4 shots, for bodies. No drones survived. No thermals worked. Just one impossible shot that had ended 1,000 years of arrogance in a single breath. The storm thickened, swallowing the battlefield whole. The blood would freeze into glass before the next team arrived, but by then, the story would already be traveling faster than any skiff. The human in the snow, the one they mocked, the one who never missed, the storm thickened. Wind howled over the ridge like a living thing, scraping across the frozen plain with claws of ice. Elias lay prone, heart steady, rifle warm from the last shot. He blinked once, let the cold seep through him again, then turned his eye back to the scope, to left, huddled behind a jagged ridge of ice glass. One was wounded, plasma dripped from a shoulder wound like liquid neon. The other was unscathed, but shaking, crouched too low, too panicked to remember anything about cover or line of sight. Elias exhaled, the wounded one first. A simple shot. He compensated for the angle, the drifting snow, the updraft rolling off the broken ground. He knew this wind. Knew it the way an old sailor knows tides. He fired. The plasma bled turned still. The body toppled forward, arms stretched out as if to grasp salvation in the snow. The last one stood, just for a second, screaming something in his native tongue, a command. A prayer? But the rifle barked before it finished. The alien dropped like a cut wire. Then silence, not the silence of peace, but the vacuum of a void freshly made. The kind of quiet that follows the fall of something too arrogant to imagine dying. Elias waited 5 seconds longer. Listen. No more movement. No more targets. He began. Crawling backward, dragging himself into the deeper snow, careful not to leave prints. Every inch of ground he moved across, he covered again, scraping powder over with his sleeves and dragging an empty shell behind to mask his trail. In less than 5 minutes, there was no sign he had ever been there. Just 6 alien bodies cooling fast. Blood frozen in mid-spatter. The noble's shattered skull still glinting under the icy starlight. Far above, in orbit, the command vessel of the Galactic Security Directorate had watched the livestream die. The silence afterward was thunderous. High priority comes lit up in emergency bursts. Deploy biohazard teams. Seal the system. Repeat. Full quarantine on Snowfall Prime. A single human has eliminated 5 highborn with a non-network projectile weapon. We are not alone. We are not unchallenged. Within an hour, every outbound ship from the sector was pulled back. Every inbound convoy rerouted. Automated mining colonies shut their gates and sent home all non-essential staff. The planet was flagged red in the archive of civilized worlds. And still, they couldn't explain it. There were no therm-als. No digital traces. No satellite signatures. Just an anomaly in a glacier storm and 5 noble corpses with perfectly placed entry wounds. By the end of the day, stories had already begun to spread. On the neon-lit underdecks of freight haulers, smugglers whispered about the ghost of Snowfall Prime on aristocrat pleasure barges. The nobility avoided the name, referring to it only as the incident. Some said it was a new human weapon, something ancient and cursed. Others said he wasn't a man at all, but a revenant, summoned by the screams of his dead comrades. But those who knew humans really knew them understood. They hadn't sent a superweapon. They hadn't sent a ghost. They just sent a man with a rifle and a reason. Far below, in the hollow heart of a glacial valley, Elias walked alone. Slow and deliberate. His knees ached. His hands were burned from the cold. His stomach gnawed at itself. But he walked anyway, rifle slung across his back like a scythe. The storm curled around him like a cloak. He whispered into the wind, perhaps. To no one, perhaps to the ice itself. They called us animals. But even animals learn to bite, and with that, he vanished into the snow, no trace. No footsteps, just the myth, months later, in a recruitment center orbiting a peaceful world. A young alien cadet sat before a grainy security briefing. The footage was low res, captured by a secondary feed before the main drone died. It showed the noble preening before his speech, then collapsing in an instant, his head erupting in silence. The cadet swallowed, another image followed. 5 still bodies, faces frozen in expressions of disbelief. No sign of the shooter. No heat. Trail. No gunfire audio. Just death. The cadet looked at his instructor, voice trembling. We're not going there, right? The instructor didn't answer. He just shut the briefing down and left the room.